You want to understand midpoints in astrology, but you don't know where to start? Well, please like, subscribe, comment, share if you don't care. With peace and love. In this video, I'm going to teach you about midpoints for free. Let's get into it. With the help of Grok AI Agent, I was able to bring this video to you because it helps generate these beautiful text reports that I really enjoy bringing to you guys to help you learn astrology for free. Excuse me. Let's get into this. So we're going to talk about what a midpoint even is, the full suite of degree dials, mathematics and precision orbs, as well as famous natal charts, midpoint dissections, Albert Einstein, Frida Kahlo, Nikola Tesla, and Queen Elizabeth II, as well as disaster and collective event analysis, RMS Titanic, Chernobyl, and 9/11, as well as working method and synthesis rules, selected midpoint lexicon chord pairs, the appendix, quick reference formulas, and orbs. Let's get started. So first, we see the immediate orientation of what a midpoint even is. So a midpoint is the exact geometric center between two chart factors, okay? Meaning when a third factor lands on that center or forms a hard aspect to it, the three form a planetary picture, written AB equals C. The combined meaning of A and B is focused through C. This is the core unit of cosmobiology and Uranian work. So unlike a simple aspect, we know that the midpoint creates a third emergent frequency, a standing wave of combined archetypal force. With your hard aspects, you see 0 degrees, 45 degrees, 90 degrees, 135 degrees, 180 degrees activated most reliably because they share the same harmonic family. And here we see direct near midpoint geometry, while the far midpoint always lies 180 degrees opposite. So yeah, these are the examples. As you can see, planet A is Sun 15 degrees Leo. You got planet B at Saturn 25 degrees Scorpio, and midpoint is 5 degrees Libra. It's direct midpoint geometry. All right. Also, that far midpoint is going to be near, adding 180 degrees. So in this more breakdown, technical, Sun at 15 degrees Leo, 135 degrees actually, and Saturn at 25 degrees Scorpio, which is 235 degrees, and they produce a near midpoint at 5 degrees Libra, 185 degrees. And we see that any planet, angle, or node near 5 degrees of the cardinal signs, or an hard aspect of that degree, activates the Sun-Saturn combination, themes of tempered will, authority earned through time, and the gravity of purpose. Let's talk about the full suite of degree dials for precision. So precision midpoint work requires fluency across several modular projections of the ecliptic. Each dial reveals a different harmonic layer. Comparison of the three primary dials used in rigorous midpoint analysis. So here is a 360-degree full wheel, which is of course 12 signs full aspects view. And we have 90 degrees cosmobiology dial, which hard aspects equal conjunctions on the dial. And we have 22.5 degrees 16th harmonic with finer resonances and timing. So for our 360 degrees wheel, it's a familiar full zodiac essential for house context, sign quality, and soft aspects. Midpoints calculated here first, then transferred to the compressed dials for activation scanning. In the 90 degrees dial, we see the fourth harmonic cosmobiology standard. So every longitude is reduced modal 90 degrees. We see conjunctions, squares, and oppositions all appear as conjunctions on the dial. Semi-squares and sesquiquadrates appear at 45 degrees to the axis. This is the primary working instrument for spotting planetary pictures at a glance. Cardinal degrees occupy 0 through 30 degrees, fixed 30 degrees through 60 degrees, and immutable 60 degrees through 90 degrees on the dial. Here we see working 90 degrees dial with sample planetary placements. Clusters indicate simultaneous hard aspect activation. And we see, more specifically, the conjunction, square, and opposition appear as clusters. So, as we can see on screen, got the fixed right here, mutable right there, cardinal right over here, and we get to see where things are on the dial. So Mars, Venus, we got Moon, Jupiter, Sun, and Mercury. And 22.5 degrees dial, axis 16th harmonic, further refinement. The 22.5 degrees multiples capture the semi-square family more cleanly and reveal subtler resonances useful for fine timing, rectification, and highly sensitive charts. In practice, one often works on the 90-degree dial and simply notes the 22.5 degrees and 67.5 degrees axes as additional sensitive lines. 11.25 degrees and higher, 32nd harmonic and beyond, reserved for advanced research in microtiming. These divisions can isolate extremely tight midpoint trees and are sometimes used in the analysis of collective events, where many charts converge on the same minute degrees. So here, Sun, Saturn midpoint, 5 degrees Libra. This chart is showing a full 360-degree wheel, showing the same Sun, Saturn midpoint highlighted for comparison with the 90 degrees view. So our midpoint is right here, in between the Sun, Saturn, and since we know that the first house is Aries and Pisces is the last house, that places this midpoint right in the middle of the 6th and the 6th and 7th. So I'm just saying that that midpoint can have features of the 6th house and the 7th house. Mathematics and precision orbs. So we're letting A and B be ecliptic longitudes in 0 degrees, 360 degrees. So this might look confusing, but right here we'll see M1 equals A adding B dividing 2 move 360 degrees, and you see M2 equals M1 adding 180 degrees mode is 360 degrees. So both midpoints are theoretically active. The near midpoint shorter arc is usually prioritized in interpretation. On the 90-degree style, the two coincide in effect for hard aspect work. These are recommended orbs, typed for clarity. We're going to look at the context as well as the orb and notes. So the natal planet midpoint lesser than 1.5 degrees with the notes lesser than 1.0 degrees preferred for outer planets. Angle ascendant midheaven to midpoint, and it's lesser than 2.0 degrees. Strong charts tolerate the wider end. Transit natal midpoint lesser than 1.0 degrees, 0.5 degrees for sharp event correlation. Progressed midpoint lesser than 1.0 degrees, moon slightly wider acceptable. Synastry overlay lesser than 1.0 degrees, mutual midpoints especially potent. And collective event charts lesser than 1.0 degrees, multiple converging pictures, increased significance. So a rule of thumb here is the tighter the orb, the more unmistakable the resonance. A midpoint activated within the 0.3 through 0.5 degrees often functions as a primary signature of the chart or event. Alright, famous natal charts. Following analysis, use publicly documented birth data, route and ratings where available, and focus on the tightest, most revealing midpoint structures. Interpretations are original and oriented toward the resonance model developed in this codex. So Albert Einstein was first up. So his chart is a classic demonstration of Mercury activating the Jupiter-Neptune midpoint. And the combination describes an intellect, which is Mercury, that operates as a conduit for expansive, almost visionary insight, Jupiter-Neptune. In resonance language, we see the mind becomes a focal lens for a field of unified, boundary dissolving comprehension. In this key picture, Mercury equals Jupiter-Neptune, very tight. So the principle here is inspired cognition, the capacity to visualize abstract relations as concrete images, scientific imagination that borders on the mystical, and the psychological correspondence, thinking that feels like revelation, discomfort with purely mechanistic models, a lifelong preference for elegant, simple principles underlying complexity. We see additional support comes from Sun-Mercury context and a strong Uranus signature, which has a disruptive paradigm-shifting voltage. The midpoint does not make genius, it describes the precise frequency through which a particular form of genius becomes available. On the 90-degree style, that picture stands out as a clear cluster. On the 22.5 degrees level, the orb tightens further, confirming its structural importance. Frida Kahlo. So Kepler's chart shows a powerful moon Pluto equals ascendant complex and a tightly activated Venus Mars midpoint. So the moon Pluto equals ascendant picture describes an emotional underworld that is written directly onto the body and the public face. Pain, regeneration, unflinching self-portraiture, is the primary language of identity. Okay, so we see in regards to the key pictures here, moon Pluto equals ascendant, body is site of transformative feeling, and we see Venus Mars tightly linked to personal points, erotic and creative polarity lived at high intensity. The combination yellows an art of radical honesty about the wounded desiring regenerating organism. Saturn context at the endurance, the formal discipline that turned private catastrophe into enduring images. On the 90-degree style, these pictures form dense clusters around the ankles, explaining why our physical and emotional history became inseparable from our artistic identity. The evolutionary invitation of such a configuration is to metabolize extreme experience into symbolic form that serves both personal integration and collective witnessing. And Nikola Tesla's chart using the commonly accepted midnight data shows a striking Uranus-Neptune emphasis and Mercury-Uranus pictures. So the mind, Mercury, is wired directly into the high-voltage, future-oriented, boundary-dissolving field of Uranus-Neptune. Ideas arrive as complete, almost hallucinatory downloads. Difficulty lies in grounding them into stable social and financial structures. Saturn challenges. Alright, so the key resonance here. Mercury linked to Uranus-Neptune midpoints, okay? Classic signature of the inventive visionary, whose thought processes operate outside ordinary sequential logic. We see Sun-Uranus further amplifies the need for vertical autonomy. The chart illustrates both the gift and the cost of living at the extreme edge of a midpoint field. Extraordinary originality paired with chronic difficulty in ordinary human exchange and material security. Queen Elizabeth II, chart defined by Saturnian and solar authority structures, Sun-Saturn midpoints, and angular Saturn describe a life of discipline and embodiment of role. The moon's context to outer planets have the capacity to serve as an emotional container for a nation across decades of change. Midpoints involving the midheaven and Saturn emphasize duty, longevity, and the slow crystallization of institutional identity. So, the resonance model reads these configurations as a standing wave of responsible continuity. Personal will Sun is yoked to the principle of enduring form Saturn and expressed through the public vector, midheaven. So the chart is a masterclass in how tight midpoints to the angles can shape an entire biography around a single thematic complex. Now we're looking at disaster and collective event analysis. Collective events can be examined through the midpoint of the event chart itself and through the activated midpoints in the charts of key participants or the location. The method is identical to natal work. Identify the tightest planetary pictures, read their combined frequency, and observe how the symbolism aligns with the nature and timing of the event. Causation is not asserted, correlation of symbolic fields is. RMS Titanic. So, Titanic's departure and the collision with the iceberg have been studied extensively in mundane astrology. A recurring observation is the prominence of Saturn-Neptune and Mars-Neptune pictures in the relevant event charts. Combinations classically associated with structure Saturn, meaning dissolution of or unseen hazard Neptune, and with forceful action Mars, under conditions of fog, misjudgment, or idealistic overconfidence Neptune. On the 90-degree style, these pictures from noticeable clusters. Mars-Neptune midpoints speak to the theme of action under illusion or in obscure conditions. Saturn-Neptune to the failure or sacrifice of a grand structure. The presence of angular activations intensifies the public and historical weight. The analysis does not claim the midpoints caused the disaster, but it shows that the celestial field at the time carried frequencies highly congruent with the symbolic signature of the event. It's a practical lesson here for the practitioner. When scanning event charts, give priority to midpoints involving Mars, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, especially when they tie to the angles or the nodes. Multiple overlapping pictures raise the signal-to-noise ratio. Alright. Chernobyl event chart shows pronounced Uranus-Pluto and Sun-Pluto midpoint activity, together with Neptune context. So Uranus-Pluto is a signature of sudden violent release of previously contained power in enough tech systems reaching a critical threshold. Neptune has the themes of invisible contamination, systemic denial, and the long half-life of of consequences. In resonance terms, the chart describes a standing wave of metamorphic force Pluto meeting disruptive liberation Uranus under conditions of obscured or idealized safety assumptions Neptune. The angularity of key factors at the time of the explosion further concentrates the expression into a single irreversible historical moment. Again, the midpoints map the qualitative field. They do not replace engineering or political analysis. They complement it with symbolic precision. 9/11. Mundane analysis of the 9/11 charts repeatedly note the activation of Saturn-Pluto midpoints and Mars-Uranus or Mars-Pluto pictures, often tied to the angles of the locations. Saturn-Pluto is the classic signature of structural breakdown and force endings in a confrontation with collective shadow material around power and security. Mars combinations apply the kinetic, aggressive, or catastrophic delivery system. On both the 90 degrees and 22.5 degrees dials, the relevant pictures form tight clusters. The resonance model reads the configuration as a high-amplitude standing wave of forced structural death and rebirth delivered through sudden martial action. Subsequent decades of geopolitical and cultural consequence can be tracked through the longer cycles of the same outer planet midpoints as they continue to be activated by later transits. Event analysis is performed solely to refine technique and understand symbolic congruence. It's never used to assign blame, to claim predictive certainty, or to diminish the human reality of suffering. Practitioner's stance remains one of disciplined observation and respectful interpretation. Alright, working method and synthesis. So there's 10 steps here. The goal is not to accumulate keywords, but to hear the single clear tone that arises when two planetary frequencies meet, and the third factor sounds the resultant wave. Compute all core midpoints, luminaries, planets, ascendant, midheaven, nodes, and 360 degrees space. Transfer to the 90 degrees dial and identify the tightest clusters, or less than 1.5 degrees natal and lesser than 1.0 degrees event. Note any 22.5 degrees axis activations for finer resolution. Rank pictures by tightness and by involvement of personal points or angles. For each major picture, state the principle in your own words before consulting any lexicon. Layer psychological, somatic, relational, and evolutionary dimensions. Cross-check with traditional aspects, houses, and elemental balance. In event work, look for convergence of multiple outer planet midpoints on the angles. In natal work, track the same midpoints through transits and progressions across life. Always return the interpretation to the living person or the historical context. Never refine the symbol. Thank you for watching this video with peace and love, and I hope to see you in the next one. Piscean out.